Franz Hartmann, who's the Executive Director of the Toronto Environmental Alliance, and also active in the transit movement, particularly around Transit City.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Franz Hartmann. I'm with the Toronto Environmental Alliance. We're a local environmental advocacy group that's been around for about 22 years. 20 years ago, actually, almost to the day, I remember it because the Oka crisis was happening. I was shopping around for a master's paper. I was doing my master's at York, a year away from starting my PhD, and I got interested in waste management and urban environmental issues, and that was kind of the beginning of what's been a 20-year odyssey. And I must say, it's really nice to see a whole bunch of people in a room talking about an urban issue, because 20 years ago, people just weren't interested. So it's nice to see the change that's taken place. I'm here to talk about what's happening on the ground with transit issues here in Toronto, and also I just want to bring some thoughts to the discussion about the challenges and opportunities that exist with the free transit campaign. T is part of an organization or a coalition called the Public Transit Coalition, which formed in March of this year. And it was a number of community groups: Social Planning Toronto, the Toronto York Region Labour Council, T, CUPE, many others, some individuals. Steve Monroe, who some of you may know is probably one of the most knowledgeable people in Canada on transit issues from a technical perspective. And we came together because we were very afraid with what was happening in the municipal election. In particular, we had an emerging number of candidates, first of all, talking about privatizing the TTC. Secondly, talking about delaying the implementation of Transit City, which I'll talk about for a moment. And thirdly, because there was very little discussion about the role of the provincial government funding the operating costs of the TTC. To pay for TTC, or the cost to all the drivers, all the operating costs for the TTC is roughly $1.3 billion annually. That's going to only go up as transit is expanded. And currently, about 68% of that is covered by the fare box. And that is the highest fare percentage in any North American system. The remainder is covered mostly right now by City of Toronto taxes. Historically, in the past, half of it was of that remainder was paid for by the province as a grant, and the other half came from the City of Toronto. So just in context, if we're talking about free transit, we're talking about having to come up between $800 million to $1 billion a year. Anyway, so a number of us came together and said, we got to do something, because where the debate is going right now is frightening. It is an attack on public transit, and it's an attack on the economic viability of transit, and most importantly, Transit City, which is about building 8 light rail transit lines, not the St. Clair streetcar sort of trains, but light rail transit. Many of you who've been to Europe will know what I'm talking about, into all parts of the city. And this isn't just good environmental policy, which is partially what attracted T to the table, but it's also good social equity policy, because it's the people in the inner suburbs right now who have to wait 20 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes for a bus. And then when they get on the bus, it's really crowded, and then it takes them 40 minutes to get from point A to B, to get onto the subway, and they're spending a huge amount of time commuting, probably in between 2 or 3 jobs, which they have to do because they're making minimum wage, which is not enough to survive. So accessible fast transit and building Transit City as quickly as possible makes social justice sense as well as environmental sense. So based on those 3 issues, we came together and we developed the Public Transit Coalition, and we have a pledge. And anybody who wants to be a member of the Public Transit Coalition simply has to agree to this pledge. And the pledge is, I agree that the TTC must be kept public, be properly funded by all orders of government, and that the Transit City light rail plan be built by 2020. Very simple. Keep it public, proper funding from all levels of government, and build Transit City by 2020. We took that message and we decided we got to get Torontonians engaged in this. They're already talking about it because it's in the media, and candidates are talking about it, but they're talking about it in the wrong way. And so we decided that the first part of our campaign would try to be to save Transit City, because this was exactly at the time that the provincial budget came out, and the finance minister said, sorry, we don't have the $4 billion we promised back in 2009 to build the first 5 Transit City lines because, well, gosh golly gee, we have to give that money as part of a tax cut we agreed to do with the feds, and which was significantly greater. So it's not like they didn't have the money. They made a conscious political choice to spend that money, or essentially to give our money away as tax cuts, so that we couldn't build Transit City. So our first part of the campaign was to try to convince as many Torontonians as possible to sign our pledge and call, and we came forward with the Save Transit City. Over the space of about 8 weeks, we got over 15,000 signatures. We went into the subway stops, we talked to people one-on-one, we got people to sign petitions, we went to community groups, and by we, I'm talking about the large public transit coalition. There were about 20 or 30 people actively working on this. And we got a lot of head nodding, saying, yeah, this makes sense. And it was great. Just before Earth Day, on April 21st, we held the founding meeting of the Public Transit Coalition in the council chambers at City Hall. We got 400 people from all corners of the city, and representing the diversity that is Toronto, they're all saying, we want Transit City saved, and we want the Fed or the province to step up to the table to pay proper operating costs. And it was amazing, because there was a real resonance there. People understood we need to save public transit and we need a better transit system because what we have is not enough. And it was wonderful as activists to see the energy that was there for public transit. Since then, it became clear that the McGuinty government was not interested in coming up with that money. In fact, I've heard through the grapevine that they were quite happy with the incredible response they got from the province, because it allowed Premier McGuinty to go to the rest of Ontario and say, see, Toronto's whining, and the rest of Ontario said, ha ha ha, those damn Torontonians, never happy with anything. And it was good politics for the Liberals. But it was bad politics for a whole bunch of reasons for all of us. So what the Public Transit Coalition is now doing is gearing up to the municipal election. And what we want to do is we want the ballot question, the question that people ask when they're in the ballot box about to check off who they're going to vote for, which candidate, either mayoral or councillor, is going to be the one that's going to build a transit system for all that's going to be kept public. And to help make that happen, we're coming out with a report card or a survey that's going to go out to all the candidates. We're going to do a whole bunch of public meetings, talk to people, just be in the media as much as we can and in the public eye as much as we can. After the municipal election, the plan is to then start focusing on the province again, because as those of you who follow these things know, we have a provincial election coming up in the fall of 2012?
2011.
2011, thank you. So we're about a year and change away from a provincial election. And we want to make sure that, at least for the Toronto ridings, a key issue is public transit. So that's the thinking that we have with the Public Transit Coalition. I can tell you it's a tough slog out there. It's a tough slog talking to people and getting them interested in this, because they, especially the people who need transit, because they've got busy lives, because their headspace is in different places, and if you can get their attention for a short moment or two, you've got to have a very simple and fast message. Otherwise, you've lost them. And this is something that we have been struggling with constantly. It's figuring out how do we connect with the people who will most benefit from transit, a better transit system, and have the most to lose from the path that we're on right now, or that at least certain mayoral candidates and certain newspapers in this city and certain members of the elite would like us to be on. And that's a constant challenge as an activist, because people have busy lives and people aren't paying attention to the sort of things we'd like them to pay attention to. So that gets me to a bit of a discussion about the free public transit campaign. And I think some of the challenges that it faces. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's a discussion that needs to take place. The question is how and how and when is that discussion to take place? And as most things in life, it's all about timing and making sure we've got the right timing. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that we're living in a time where we have been convinced we do not have money to pay for public services. And as I said before, we are now struggling to try to keep the expansion plans that were promised 2 years ago by the province and that were signed on by all the elites who understood the importance of Transit City and keeping congestion down. We're struggling for that. We're also struggling for the desire amongst certain members in Toronto, not certain members, certain sectors, who realize, guess what? We could make money off of the transit system if we had control of it. This is a new place to accumulate for accumulation. So let's think about how we can create the conditions that would allow a mayor or councillors to say, you know what, it makes sense to do alternative service delivery. In other words, privatization. So that's the point we're at right now. That's the battle we're facing. And so I think the question really that we have to face, both in the work that the Public Transit Coalition is doing and in the work that you guys want to do, and that is, how do you create conditions for people to be receptive to this idea? Because if people aren't there, then you might as well be talking to a brick wall. And I want to address this because this is essentially a communications challenge. And I want to address this as follows. Das Weiße Haus hat am Ölkonzern DP zum 4. Mal eine Rechnung über Kosten für die Bekämpfung der Ölplatz zukommen lassen. Für die Maßnahmen am Golf von Mexiko stellte die US-Regierung den britischen Unternehmen nach einigen Angeben 99,7 Millionen Dollar, knapp 80 Millionen Euro, in die Rechnung. 3 Führerrechnungen hatten sich auf 122 Millionen Dollar summiert. Mit den Zahlungen soll BP den Einsatz staatlicher US-Behörden zur Krisenbekämpfung abgelten. Für BP stellen sie freilich nur einen Bruchteil der bisherigen Kosten dar. Nach Firmenangaben von Montag kostete die Öltest im Golf von Mexiko die Konzern bereits 3,5 Milliarden Dollar. Now, I have just committed 3 cardinal sins in communication. First of all, I was talking about an issue, and for those of you who understand German, my apologies, my accent sucks. I wasn't talking to you about what you came here to talk about, what you wanted me to talk about. I was talking about the cost of BP and the cost to having to clean up the oil thing. Secondly, I didn't speak in a language that most of you understood or even have heard. And third, it was way too long.
Yes.
It was way too long. But the reason I did that was quite deliberate. And it's because it's a mistake that I have made multiple times as an activist. And I have seen too many people make multiple times as activists. And that is, we think we know an issue, we're ready to talk about it, but we don't understand who our audience is. And we don't understand where our audience's headspace is. And we don't understand with how to really connect with them. And that, to me, I think is a key issue that we are always confronted with at the Public Transit Coalition, and I'd like to bring to the discussion here. And I think the first issue is, how do you frame the issue in a way that resonates with where people are right now? As Deb rightly pointed out, you go out there with a message of free public transit, most people are going to look at you and go, yeah, that'd be great. I'd also like to be able to go to the grocery store and not have to pay for my food. There's an incredibility, it's like you're not there. And it's not that we shouldn't get people there, it's that we can't, I would argue, we have to be very careful about framing it so that people don't immediately just brush you off as your wacko. Because that's what happens. That was the concern we had when we were developing our messaging for the Public Transit Coalition, is how do you connect with people who are, their thought is, fine, if I have to pay $2.50 for a token, I will, but bloody hell, just get me a bus there so I don't have to wait for 20 minutes or half an hour. Like, that's what I want. Sure, it'd be great if there was, if there was more money, and if the TTC token prices weren't going to go up next year. But I'll be happy with just having better system. So we have to be cognizant of that reality, that people are just wanting a system that works. They want to get rid of the so-called lazy workers, right? We've all seen the videos. We've all seen the cartoons that are there. The second thing is we have to know what language, both figurative and literal, that our target audiences are speaking. Most Torontonians now are from parts of the country, parts of the planet, I'm sorry, which don't speak English anymore. So having literature in just one language no longer works. And we also have to think about the figurative language, using discourse, using language that resonates with their experiences. That's a very, very tough challenge. And I can tell you, as a reformed academic, it took me 10 years to get beyond writing in academic frame and writing in ways that resonated with the sort of audience that I was speaking with. And the third issue is, what sort of communication devices do we use and when do we use them? Pamphlets serve a purpose, but we have to think outside the box and we have to be innovative. We have to keep in mind who the audience is and the fact that they have very busy and limited lives. If we don't do this, if we don't constantly ask ourselves how to communicate best with these audiences, it doesn't matter how fantastic the idea is, it doesn't matter whether or not we have the perfect solution, and it doesn't matter if we've convinced some key people. It's not going to happen. So I'm just going to leave you with that thought of, think about communications, because that's the linchpin to making this great idea actually resonate.
And my colleague Kamilla Pietrzyk, am I right? Also a PhD student at York University and active in the Toronto Workers' Assembly.
Hi everyone, I'm Kamilla. I'm a graduate student at York and a proud member of PP393 and of the Greater Toronto Workers' Assembly. I'm just going to take a few more minutes to tell you about the campaign and different ways that you can plug in. So the campaign for free and accessible public transit is a relatively new campaign for the Assembly. It was decided at the previous gathering of the Toronto Workers' Assembly, which took place in April, that it would become one of the two principal campaigns hosted by the Assembly, the other one being the public sector campaign. The idea for this campaign initially arose out of some of the enthusiasm and energy around the Right to the City campaign, which Deb alluded to, as well as out of a recognition that organizing around the issue of transit can have immense popular appeal right now because so many people are upset about the recent fare hikes. And we feel that if we can build an effective grassroots campaign around transit issues in the city, then we could help to direct and shape some of this anger and frustration and bring in an anti-capitalist perspective that could include an analysis of public goods, public accountability, the right to democratic participation in the shaping of our city, and the failures of the market system. Now, we know that this will be hard, and Franz usefully outlined some of the challenges and difficulties, but we feel that if we can pull it off, and if we can actually figure out a way to communicate our message effectively and in an accessible way, then this campaign for free and accessible transit could actually become a mass popular movement because it has such clear and very tangible links to everyday experiences of so many people living in Toronto, especially those coming from lower and middle income brackets. And as some of the speakers have already indicated, the fact is that public transit is an essential part of our city's public infrastructure. And yet, Toronto's system is among the least so-called public systems of this sort anywhere in the world. Transit systems in other cities receive large public subsidies to help cover their operating budgets. But in Toronto, the figure is something like 68%, as Franz mentioned, in terms of relying on fares to cover the operating budget. Fares have increased from $1.10 in 1993 to $3 in 2010. And of course, we can all recognize the increased financial burden that this represents for people, working class people and middle class people, who have to take the transit every day and end up basically disproportionately funding our so-called public system out of their own pockets. Although the reality is that all citizens of Toronto, not just those who take the transit, but also the car drivers who never get out of their cars to take the TTC, end up benefiting from having public transit infrastructure. And this is also why it's so infuriating to realize that for the $1.2 billion that was wasted on the G20 summit, we could have had free transit in the city of Toronto for a full year. But you still may ask yourself, why demand free and accessible transit? Why not ask for lower fares, something more realistic? Now, we are still talking about short, medium, and long-term goals, and in fact, that will be the main subject of discussion at our upcoming meeting, which is July 26th, and we hope to see some of you there. And we haven't yet ruled out the idea of incremental goals and gains, like adding seniors to day passes, for example. But we don't generally want just a campaign that wants lower fares. We recognize that demand for free and accessible public transit is a radical one, but that's what we feel its strength is. It has the potential, we feel, to shift the discourse around transit policy and issues in the city to the left, as well as hopefully politicize those who aren't already politically active. So through this campaign, what we also hope to achieve is to make free transit a reference point within mainstream discussions of transit policy, as well as making transit funding an issue in the provincial and the municipal elections, as well as the upcoming Toronto mayoral campaign. And for those who still think that free and accessible public transit is a pipe dream or a pie in the sky, the fact is that many cities in the world already have either free or partially free transit systems. For example, in the downtown core, or on so-called spare the air days when smog levels are high. As many as 28 cities, in fact, across North America and Europe already have zero-fare systems, including the island of Hawaii, downtown Pittsburgh, and Aubagne in France. The city of Hasselt, mentioned in the video at the beginning, in Belgium implemented free transit in 1997 to reduce traffic congestion. And a year later, ridership increased by over 600%. It's not that surprising if you think about it, because free transit really equals less traffic, fewer accidents, less congestion, easier parking, cleaner air, better healthcare, greater mobility, etc. So in more concrete terms, what is the state of the current campaign for free and accessible transit? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, it is still a relatively new campaign. It's been around since April, and so we have already had time to learn about these issues, but we continue to look for compelling and comprehensive answers to critical questions like how can free transit be funded sustainably over the long term? What lessons can we learn from similar campaigns in Canada and around the world? And what work is being done around transit in the city, and what ways should we and can we plug into existing efforts? So these are some of the critical questions that we need to answer as we move on after today with this campaign. And we hope that those of you here today will be able to help us answer some of these questions in the breakaway group discussions that we will have in just a moment. But as indispensable as analysis and research is, we're not just about research and talking the talk. We have started to organize our first actions. We have so far done 2 rounds of leafleting at select TTC stations, as T has done as well in the Save Trans Coalition. And we basically try to go to TTC stations in marginalized or working class communities where we feel that the impact of the fare hikes is likely to be most severely felt. We plan to do this leafleting on a systematic basis. Some of us have gotten into conversations where we started talking about adding ways of leafleting in various group formats and with different kinds of leaflets. We also are about to start planning our next event, which will probably happen somewhere in early September and will likely involve a series of workshops. One workshop that we're looking at is how we can use guerrilla theater to mobilize Torontonians around the issue of free and accessible transit. And I don't know how many of you have seen the Lady Gaga Bad Romance video that became viral on YouTube for a while, but we're basically inspired by that. Basically a group of activists infiltrated the Westin St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco and did a rendition of this video, changing it from Bad Romance to Bad Hotel. We kind of did a flash mob thing, impromptu, and it was very popular. It seems like an effective technique. So what we want to do is work on some scripts for various skits and musical numbers that we can perform by going into subways, streetcars and buses, engaging with people, having that face-to-face contact, which many of us feel is very important in our fragmented postmodern culture.